I know the video's late, but let's get started, shall we? So let's talk about Realpolitik. Now, when I say that, I basically just mean practical politics. So, when you think about politics, a lot of people want to do it based on their ideals. Like if you're a liberal, you think liberté, égalité, fraternité. You want to do it based on your beliefs. But politics is not based on ideals and practice. That's just a general thing. I want you to think about actually implementing most ideals. They're made for, well, ideal situations, perfect flat situations, but rarely are you going to have that. For example, let's say you're in a country filled with drug lords. Sure, maybe your ideal, let's say you're a libertarian, is I don't want people to be restricted from buying drugs, but when everyone is suffering from drug dealers basically forcing them to buy things at gunpoint, you basically have to make a decision of, okay, we're going to need to start cracking down on this to fix the problem. You can legalize it later, maybe, but in the short term, in the current situation, you often have to act on pragmatism. Because when it comes to other states, and when it comes to managing yourself, pragmatism and self interest will take precedent. That's just how it is. Because it does not matter how good your ideals are if you're dead. That is my one complaint I'll have with people who say, we should do this because it's ideal. No. Pragmatism, as much as people may say, oh, it's not very committed, it's not practical, it is built on pragmatism, or in other words, it is built on what is practical, practicality. See, that's what being pragmatic is, acting based on what is reasonable, practical. You're not going to go all the way if you don't think you can achieve all the way. You can eliminate a threat easily enough, but if you don't believe you can solve something simply, or push an ideal to its limit, then you're not going to go there. You're going to act within reason. So look at your self-interest, look at what you can practically do, and then you act upon it. That is how politics works in practice. And to give a little quote from a certain French annoyance to basically everyone, quote, there are no friends in diplomacy, only interests. That is reality. As much as people like to say, oh, why are we messing with our allies? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Basically, every state has at some point done similar on the sole basis of, well, interests. France and the UK frequently butted heads over interests. They worked together because of interests. And when they found their interests clashing again, they would fight each other or disagree. Sure, with the EU, which the UK was in briefly, well, not necessarily briefly, but was in and then left, during the time of the EU, they could negotiate through them, or the UN, as both were on the Security Council. But they still would clash when their interests were not aligned. The US, similarly, with its European allies during the Cold War, would sometimes clash with them, like at the Suez Crisis, because essentially the interest of the United States was not seizing the Suez Canal, it was, okay, we need to endorse decolonization because we said we would, and it gives the communists too much leverage to not do so. At the same time, yes, we would rather the Suez not be controlled by an ally of the Soviets. And so they were stuck in a position where they essentially had to say, alright, do we side with Europe, specifically Britain and France, or do we side with Egypt, who had seized the Suez Canal, with the British staging an incident to retake it? And the US basically said, alright, we must stand by a decolonial position. Europe, back the freak off. This is pushing it. And it was even so bad that it was Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower, that was dealing with this. The man who intervened in basically every country in Latin America was saying, nope, you can't intervene, to Britain and France. Erstwhile allies. Why? Because interests. There are no friends when it comes to geopolitics. Just because you shake hands with Russia one moment does not mean they're going to stay loyal to you the next. They could very well betray you. Or you could work with the PRC, similar story. The European Union, same deal. Pretending like friendships matter when it comes to geopolitics is a forced position, because fundamentally, states are looking out for their own interests. Even if you have a friend in the current government, let's say, like a legitimate friend between you and them, what can very well and will likely happen is they get fired and replaced by someone who doesn't have that rapport with you. and they're going to act based on what they think is their country's interests. And so, your friendship will fundamentally not matter then. See, actions thus are taken and derived from what the state views as best for itself, or more specifically, what the people managing the state believe are best for it and themselves. See, idealism in truth does not survive contact with geopolitical reality. People do not act rationally, not wholly rationally, and so what ends up coming from that is that irrational decisions are made, and people make different calculations because of that. If everyone acted completely rationally, you could legitimately predict what most people are going to do, because you can just figure out what do they want, how can they achieve it, what do they have access to, and just do some quick calculations. Boom, that's what they're going to do. But people are people, and rarely do they take the straightforward and simple method, even if it's easier sometimes. Sometimes people just do things the hard way just because. Rarely have you seen a person be completely rational. And so you get, naturally, some irrational actions. And ideals work in perfect worlds. They work in worlds of complete rationality, of understanding. But the reality of irrationality fundamentally destroys any effectiveness that idealism will have when put into practice. Because when you try to put in your ideals, well, let's face it, they're not going to align with practical reality. Take open borders as an example. The idea of the blank slate, that everyone is just a blank person to be filled in by experiences with who they're around, is completely false. And so when that ideal, the tabula rasa, was tried and implemented into several governments who opted for open borders because of it, what ended up happening? You get crime going up, per capita crime rates of specific groups increase, and people become minorities in their own countries, while people who regularly break the law continue to spread. It wasn't a good thing, and it still isn't going too well. Pragmatism goes first. Why? Because you can recognize the flaws and act accordingly. Sometimes that means sacrifices. You can call it evil, go ahead, don't care. What matters, first and foremost, is securing interests. And if you can align those interests with others, perfect. But if you can't, oftentimes you'll just have to act anyways, or find a compromise. But rarely will you find a truly ideal situation, or a place for ideals. Because simply put, ideals do not last. They do not survive contact with the enemy. In this case, the reality on the ground. And so, from there, you necessarily have to act accordingly. Plan based on what is true, what is confirmed, and what you do know, while making room for potential changes and irrational behaviors of others. If you don't, you lose. That'll be all for this video. I hope you enjoy. Feel free to comment.